today's session is on consistency and standards. Now, this is really in the context of one of the key problems that businesses often come to us with, or certainly one of the things we hear most often is where process documentation within an organization is difficult to read, is the sort of polite way that we describe it. Sometimes people describe it as being impenetrable or unusable. So what I wanted to just cover off in this session is, so talking about using consistency across processes and standards in order to make process documentation easier to use, easier to understand, and so on. These things. So I'm going to first of all just ask a question: why should we care whether a process is hard to read in the first place? Then I was going to sort of explore a bit about, well, why are processes difficult to read? And then very briefly touch on how consistency helps. And then what I wanted to do is show you a few of the tools that we've got in Skore to help with driving consistency. A lot of consistency in process mapping is really around, agreeing standards and checking and make sure it's being done in a consistent way. But as I said, we'll touch on a few things there that can help you within the product. So the first question is should we care, or why should we care if processes are hard to read? And sometimes processes are designed for they might be designed for very specific audience. It might be a very, very technical document created for a very technical audience. So actually that probably doesn't matter. But again, the question, why should we care if processes are hard or difficult to read? Wasted time in terms of the effort that went into create. So if no one's going to read them, you've spent the time to create them. Lack of buy-in. So if you, for example, were implementing some sort of change in the business, if people don't understand or can't read the process, then it's going to be that much harder for them to basically to understand what the change is, right? We can end up doing the wrong things, or doing the things we're doing, we do them wrong, or we're just doing the wrong things altogether. And ultimately that just ends up in just a waste of time. We can end up losing money, taking longer to do things. I think one of the bigger impacts, though, potentially is the risk of you get it wrong or you do the wrong thing. Therefore, there's a good high possibility that you produce the wrong outcome. That can have a significant risk in terms of, you might end up breaking the law, or I put rather blandly, a poor customer experience, but actually you might end up injuring somebody by doing the wrong thing, and that could have legal implications, which leads to brand damage and so on. Obviously things can take longer than they should, and I was thinking more about things like, well, if the process is too difficult to read, you then might have to work out yourself how to do the thing. So you've got to put that extra thinking time in to work out how to do the thing, or you go and ask other people, how do I do this? And so that's taking up not just additional time, but it's taking their time. You're involving more people in something that might be quite simple. The other thing is people can get quite frustrated with that documentation. They get frustrated that they don't know, what to do, and therefore all the other problems that we talked about. People might be concerned that if they don't understand it, how confident are they that they're going to get it right when they do it? That has an impact on morale. It could lead to being additional checks, poor communications, and so on. There is another thing, though, that I didn't put on here, which I've come across. Be interested to know if anyone else has seen this, and that's where if a process is quite difficult or complicated to read, people will often they'll nod their agreement with it. And I've seen a situation where people have approved processes, and then actually when questioned about it later, they actually didn't understand the process at all, but for whatever reason didn't want to look like they didn't know, or didn't want to come across as maybe thinking like they didn't know how to do their job or whatever. And so you end up in a situation, going back to what James said at the beginning, that you've actually invested quite a lot of time creating this documentation. But not only was that a waste of time, but actually you've then got this false sense of security that something's actually being done in the right way, but it's not, because people don't really know what they're supposed to do, but are saying they do. So potentially even a worse challenge or situation to deal with. Why are processes sometimes difficult to read? Terminology is a good one, yeah. So yeah, very specific technical terminology or acronyms and abbreviations that you might not be familiar with. I once worked with an organization that, I won't say their name, but they had on their intranet site, they had an acronym search engine, and it was, they'd called it chaos because it was, without it was chaos. So there were so many acronyms that people, you had literally department to department, people didn't know what each other were talking about. Example, that's one of the things that we often see. I've got the text heavy. Actually, for some people that's fine. It works quite well. I have a read write learning and thinking style, so text actually works quite well for me. But more people tend to prefer something visual to help them, especially complex or complicated processes with branching, that sort of thing. It's very, very difficult to convey that in text-based documentation, but very, very common. Another sort of maybe a derivative of that we've seen a lot of for some reason this year is processes described in spreadsheets. So still mainly text-based, but slightly easier because they've used the sort of structure, the cell structure, the spreadsheet to lay it out in a slightly better way, but still very, very difficult. Often, I think one of the most common things that we see after the text-based versions is where processes have been designed for a specific audience. And it's often hard for certain audiences to think when they read a process and they understand the way it's been written. So, if you view something with a technical symbology in it, it might make sense to you as an expert in that area, but can be very difficult for other people to understand. And for a lot of us, it can actually be quite difficult to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. So it was, while we might understand something, we can sometimes find it difficult to understand why others don't understand it or follow it, and they won't have the same experience as us, but they won't be able to read that. So that's a common one. Obviously, the topic of this session is around consistency, and I think again something we see all the time, even when people are creating, say, visual processes. If different people are creating them and there's no standard or common way to describe those processes, again, when you look at a process one person's created versus another one, you can find very, very different way of describing the process. People will often use different levels of detail. For example, some people tend to think at quite high levels and others think in lots of detail. And so when you look at one process versus the other, they look very, very different, and again, pitched at different levels. One of the things in the UPN approach we use in Skore, where we quite strictly talk about the steps in a process as being activities and described as a verb and a noun, I rarely see that applied consistently in other places. And again, so reading a process and you've got lots of boxes on them, some boxes refer to functions within a business, some of them refer to activities, some of them refer to objects that might exist, and so on. So it's very difficult to kind of easily read the process without really thinking about what each of those types of things is. It's sort of related to that level of high level, low level details. Sometimes processes, you can look at them and they've just got way too much information on one page to make sense of, or at the other end of the scale, not enough information on the page, so not enough information to help guide you. So how does consistency help? I think we've sort of touched on it in some of the things there, but basically it just makes it easier for people to consume the information. Ideally, if you've got a consistent way to describe processes and a consistent approach, then people only have to learn it once. I mean, ideally, and even really have to learn it, you want to make it so simple that it's, and standardized, that it's intuitive to pick up. But there'll always be some sort of guidance required for some users of it. So to the extent possible, make it only learn. You only have to learn it once. It should be easily recognizable. So when people look at a process, they should be easily able to focus in on the areas that are important to them. So again, going back to what I was just saying, if you've got a box that describes activities, only ever use that to describe activities and not other things. Otherwise, it's not recognizable. And the bottom here, I put everyone can benefit from best practices. Essentially, what I'm saying there is that if you've got a consistent way of describing the process, then you've got more chance of people coming back and going, well, actually, this bit doesn't work, or it doesn't make sense to me, and here's why. And so it becomes that much easier to continuously improve the processes. It's easier for people to describe why something doesn't work and how they would improve it. And so that sort of whole communication level just gets much easier. Collaboration gets easier, and the ability to feedback lessons learned and improve the process over time gets easier too. Cool. So let's quickly look at the sorts of things that we've got in Skore. So first thing I mentioned before is we've based the product around the universal process notation. So it in itself has a sort of standard set of ways of doing things. So we only ever really use one shape. So we describe the steps in a process as an activity, and we use that verb noun language to describe what the activities are. We use inputs and outputs to clearly describe when or what triggers an activity to start and how we know when it finishes. And that then kind of allows us to build those flows. We also have that capability to be able to create detailed views, so break a process down, which what it allows you to do is then summarize a process at a high level and then break that down into more and more detail. And so that does a couple of things. One, it breaks the process down into digestible chunks. So it makes it easier. We can present processes then very simply at one level at a time. But the other thing it helps to do is that when you actually go through the exercise of building the process, starting to think about your process and how different parts of process group together under different responsible roles into different logical steps actually helps people think more critically about the process and challenge the process. So it helps not just in the reading of the process, but actually the creation of it at the same time. I've kept to the very basic rules for UPN, just in terms of what the activities, inputs, outputs, and the detailed views. But you can actually go further, and I'll touch on that in a second in terms of standards. So that's the kind of basics. We've got a notation which actually guides you in terms of creating the process, and really sort of is designed to help you present the process in a simple and easy to digest way. The next thing we've got on here is style sheets. And so style sheets within Skore allow you to define a standard style for what the processes look like. And by that, I mean the colors. So, when we go back to our UPN process, what color are the boxes, what color are the text, what color are the detailed views, and so on. Any editor user can go and change colors, but the style sheet allows you to apply that consistently across the process. So for those that aren't familiar with that, let me quickly show you where that is. If I go back to the workspace view, here on the left-hand side, you don't need to be an administrator to see this, but you'll probably need to be an administrator to edit the style sheet. So I click on the admin section, and in here we've got, under the process section, we've got style sheets. If I open style sheets, you can have multiple style sheets in the system because here I've got a default one which I can set, which is the one that gets used for all the new processes that get created. But we can also set up different ones. So I've used them for sort of go, no-go type decisions, control points where I might want to use the style sheet to highlight certain points in the process. And so I can create different style sheets for that. And let me just show you what that looks like. If I want to edit a style sheet, and I can create new ones if I need to, click the three little dots there, click edit. And the style sheet editor comes up like this. Now, what this is broken by is by all the main objects. So over on the right hand side, you see a preview of what it looks like. So you can see your activity box with the detailed view, the attachment icon, the role, system, note and output. And then each of these sections has all the different styles that can be adjusted to the different colors and the size and the text size and all of those sorts of things. So that's how you can build up a style sheet. And then as you saw before, you can apply that as the default for all new processes, or you can even apply it to existing processes as well. Number 4, color picker. So this is something that's fairly new that we've added into the product, and it sits in the style sheet section as well. And here what you can define is a set of standard colors that you might want people to use when editing a process. And so these will be presented to the users wherever you use the color picker. So this is a bit like if you're using PowerPoint, for example, you have a theme set in PowerPoint and you have a standard set of, say, corporate colors that you can use. So here, if I just go quick add new, I'm going to go transparent. So what I'll do just for this, I'll just use the Skore standard colors. Okay, so I've added those 3 colors to the color palette. So at the top, we've got recently visited options. So I can click on there and I can see the processes that I've been to recently. So I can go back to my hire to retire and I'll go to edit there just so you can see. So if I just put a note box on there, I'll edit the note box, and here is one of the places where you'll see a color picker. Now that I've added those 3 colors to the workspace color palette, they will always be displayed at the top. So again, if you've got corporate colors that you want people to use, make it easier for people to use within the workspace, you can use that color palette so that they're immediately available to everyone to select, rather than them having to go through the whole color palette or type in those hexadecimal codes, that sort of thing. So the next thing, the other templates, the diagram templates are what you see at the top of the page here. And so it's got the title of the page. In my case, I've got this green bar that goes across. We've got the logo and a couple of buttons there. So let's quickly touch on how to create and edit those. So if I go back into the admin section, it's under diagram templates. And here you can see my default template that I'm using, my demo workspace template. And here I can just click edit template, and that opens up the template. And the template works or edits in exactly the same way as a process does. So you'll see I've got it open. I click the editing down there. And actually all the things on here, so the logo in the corner is just an image object. Bar, the line that goes across, is actually just a sticky note that's had the background color changed and then just been squashed up to make a line. And again, the title of the template, or what actually becomes the title of each page you see, is also a sticky note with a transparent background. But in this case, it uses what we call the dynamic text or variables. So you can select those variables and put them in. And so what will happen is every time the template or page opens with that template on, that variable will be inserted. So in this case, it's the diagram title. Now that could be all sorts of other information. It might be some of the things that you've got in the process properties, like the process purpose, or you might have the publication date within the process is published, or the process owner. And all of those fields are available from the little help menu down here on the left hand side. And you can see it's called dynamic text there. You open that up and it shows you all the different ones that are available, and they can be copied and then pasted into the note field. So if you want that sort of consistent feel for the template across every page, you can edit that and update and add other types of fields to it. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is just touch on is the process standards and guidelines. So again, we touched on all the other things that you can do in the product that sort of help you with the consistency. But then there's all those things that you can set outside of the product that can be sort of train people on and check back afterwards. So we provide, certainly to all new workspaces, if you're already using Skore and you don't have this, we can provide you a copy. We have a standard sort of template set of standards. And what this looks like here. So it's a process within Skore that we can copy into your workspace. And it's broken down into a few different areas, various useful links as well. But we've got a process mapping standards section there. So if I click on that, we've set some real basics. Process should have clearly defined purpose. Every process should have an owner. What boxes should be described with verb and noun. All boxes should have at least one input and output. And of course, you can build on these as well yourself. Other things to think about, we talk about process library standards. So these would be things like, what's your naming convention? How do you name folders? How do you use tags? All of that sort of stuff. So again, we provide some basic guidance, and then there's some best practices, and then some information around, what is your process? How do you improve your processes? What's the process of process improvement, essentially? So that's available for anyone. If you don't already have it, it's available for you as well. Well, on that note, I'll say thank you very much for everyone for coming along, taking part today, and look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.